Erik Ten Hag, one of the most polarizing names in world football. As always, the Manchester United job is one of the most scrutinized and controversial jobs in general, but Erik Ten Hag in particular has really become polarizing. His going on 3-season tenure has seen trophies, falling out with players, heavy losses, new ownership, and so many things in between. And after last season's bizarre finish where they finished 8th place but still won the FA Cup versus Manchester City at Wembley, a lot of Manchester United fans are really stuck on the question, should Erik Ten Hag stay or should Erik Ten Hag go? And today, we're going to look at his tenure so far at Manchester United and answer the question. So wait till the end to see what I would do with this guy, because honestly, the answer's more complicated than you think. Before coming to Manchester United, Erik Ten Hag was the boss at Ajax, and Ajax, just like Manchester United, is a very scrutinized job. He brought Ajax back to the pinnacle, making sure that they were constantly Eredivisie champions, and his crowning achievement was in 2019 when he took Ajax all the way to the Champions League semi-finals and minutes away from a UCL final, knocking out Real Madrid, the European champions at the time, Cristiano Ronaldo's Juventus. But what was even more impressive was the way he built this team. Ajax have always had a well-structured club. They're a team that always brings in great youth and develops so much great youth. And Erik Ten Hag was no different, as he developed the likes of Matthias de Ligt, Frenkie de Jong, Donny van de Beek to make up the core of a great 2019 team. So, in 2022, a few years after that 2019 run, when Manchester United came calling, Erik Ten Hag took the call. This was a guy who was playing a beautiful style of football, really wanted to develop the youth, and was the perfect manager for a rebuild Manchester United desperately needed. And how could United fans not be excited? A team with Ronaldo, Pogba, Bruno Fernandes, Rashford, De Gea had just finished 6th under Ralf Rangnick and barely made it into the Europa League. For a team of that quality, that was a disgrace. So once Erik Ten Hag came through the door, there was a lot of things he had to do. Everyone knows that year one of a rebuild is always the most important year. And in Erik Ten Hag's case, this was no different. He had to commit to a certain style of football, and he had to develop what he had available to him. What he had going for him as well was that he was in charge of player recruitment because United's board, well, non-existent at this moment. So immediately, Erik Ten Hag went to work and brought in Lisandro Martinez, one of his old boys from Ajax, a ball-playing center back who, when healthy, is maybe United's best defender. But that's the problem. He's never healthy. And did I also mention, the guy's 5'7". To add that up, he brings in Terrell Malacia for $15 million to give Luke Shaw some much-needed competition. So his signings were good, but how about the preseason? The big question being Cristiano Ronaldo. Cristiano Ronaldo at this time had been going through a really dark time in his life, going through what no parent should ever have to go through, the loss of a child. Add that along with the fact that he really did want to leave Manchester United at this point. He had been flirting with other clubs, trying to get a move, as he noticed that Manchester United didn't even finish in the top 4. And he is Mr. Champions League. The guy wants to play UCL. Erik Ten Hag didn't want to hear any of it and told everyone Ronaldo was here to stay and he was an important part of this team. Ronaldo, dealing with his family issues, stayed home and did not even travel for preseason, angering Erik Ten Hag. So once the season came around, Ronaldo was not starting. United had a bad start to the season, losing 2-1 to Brighton, and then the following week, losing 4-0 to Brentford. So how did club and manager want to respond to this situation? They went back to the checkbook. They immediately went out and got Real Madrid legend Casemiro, the defensive midfielder who had won everything at Real Madrid with Kroos and Modric in midfield. And not to mention, defensive midfield was probably their biggest need at that moment. So bringing in a legend like that was a great signing. The caveat was, he's a 30-plus-year-old who relies heavily on his physicality, and they brought him in for a 4-year contract, $350,000 a week in wages. That's a massive deal. Just a few days later, Erik Ten Hag brought in another old boy of his from Ajax, Antony. Now Antony would be another controversial figure at Manchester United, as he, well, hasn't lived up to expectations. And not to mention, $95 million were spent trying to get him to Manchester United. But at the time, this was seen as a great signing, just a bit of an overpay, as Antony was one of the most sought-after players in the world at this moment. Barcelona wanted him, and many other big teams also wanted him. But as we all know, Antony, well, as the season progressed, Ten Hag and Ronaldo's relationship just soured. Ten Hag would constantly just give Ronaldo the cold shoulder. Ronaldo being Ronaldo would just be emotional over this. And understandably so, because honestly, I think in this situation, this is a place where a manager and the club need to put their arm around a player, especially a club legend like Cristiano Ronaldo. You gotta help him out through a situation like this. Make him feel like this is home. Even if you know you're gonna slowly phase him out, just make him feel comfortable in that moment. And they did the exact opposite. But here's the problem. The more Ronaldo didn't play, the more United looked more fluid as a team. leading to the media saying, does Manchester United really need Cristiano Ronaldo? Again, a very ludicrous thing to say, but the results spoke for themselves. So once Ten Hag noticed this, and Ronaldo just kept getting less and less playing time, Ronaldo was giving interviews to Piers Morgan, and his United career was over. It's just sad that it had to end like that, but at the end of the day, it was best for both parties. But Erik Ten Hag kept winning, and after the World Cup break, he had this team in third, battling for all 4 cup competitions and the Premier League. And even better, he had the likes of Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford hitting record numbers, and Rashford especially having a career year. This culminated in February, where they made the League Cup final and beat Newcastle at Wembley 2-0, winning their first trophy in 7 years. Erik Ten Hag had brought silverware back to Old Trafford, even if it was just the Carabao Cup. Thing is, that's where everything peaked for Manchester United this season, because after that, well, they went out of the Europa League against Sevilla after Harry Maguire and De Gea just had really bad performances in that first leg. That cost Manchester United the tie. And in the league, well, they began to falter. And this really hit a rock bottom when they lost 7-0 at Anfield. 7-0. Their biggest humiliation in decades. Losing 7-0 to your biggest rivals is just straight up unacceptable. It doesn't matter who you are. Many people were saying this is just a blip, he's had a good season, and honestly, yeah, it was a blip. The guy had taken him to third place, had won a trophy, he had integrated a youth as Kobe Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho was trying to get even more minutes at this point. And he got Manchester United looking like Manchester United again, which was the most important thing. For season 1, Erik Ten Hag really did a great job. And it makes sense to keep going with him, right? There wouldn't be no reason to sack him at this point, he'd been doing a good job. Until the second season. Entering his second year, Erik Ten Hag really wanted to focus on continuing on building the spine of this Manchester United rebuild. He noticed that David De Gea was just not the David De Gea of old, and he couldn't play at all with his feet. So bringing in another former Ajax player, Andre Onana, a goalkeeper fresh off of a UCL final appearance with Inter, was the match made in heaven. Bring him in for 50 million. Onana could play with his feet and was a pretty decent shot stopper as well. And to add creativity in midfield, he looked to England international and Chelsea hero Mason Mount. Now probably one of Chelsea's most hated former players, but for 65 million at the time, people thought this was a good deal. And no pressure, but the kid was given the number 7. Remember, this is the number 7 that was worn by Cantona, Ronaldo, Beckham, now going to Mason Mount. I don't know about all that. But the crown jewel of this summer transfer window was Rasmus Højlund. Rasmus Højlund was a raw striker, a player with potential, but just very raw. And they bought him from Atalanta for 75 million. Again, another overpay on paper, but Rasmus Højlund has shown flashes of potential of being a world-class striker, but time will tell on that one. So after another busy transfer window, Manchester United got off to another slow start. Except this time, this start was even slower. And on top of that, injuries upon injuries upon injuries. This season got so bad with injuries, Johnny Evans started half the season, and I'm not even kidding. Half the season Johnny Evans was playing games. Johnny Evans is almost 40 years old and was brought in just to train with Manchester United. He played half the season. But at least the team was back in the Champions League. However, that Champions League campaign was honestly a disgrace. They finished last in a group of Bayern Munich, which understandable if you finish behind Bayern, but with all due respect, finishing behind Copenhagen and Galatasaray, if you're Manchester United, there's no excuse for that. And Rasmus Højlund did show his potential here, scoring 5 goals in 6 games, and honestly looking really good in these games. One of the only few highlights of Manchester United. On the flip side, Andre Onana looked like the worst goalkeeper in the world in this early period. He just looked terrible. He couldn't stop anything, and he was just conceding more goals than he should have. By the winter break though, Manchester United had kind of settled the ship and found themselves in 5th place, really pushing for 4th. But there were clear flaws in the system. It really became apparent that the season prior, when push came to shove, Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes really came in to save this team. And at that moment, Bruno Fernandes was still putting up numbers, but not as good as last season. And Marcus Rashford, oh man, he fell off a cliff, going from a 30-goal season to not even reaching 10 goals in the next one. Say what you will about Ange Postecoglou throughout the season, he had almost as many injuries as Manchester United, but you still saw the philosophy and the style of play that he wanted to play with. The same cannot be said for Erik Ten Hag. They couldn't create chances for Rasmus Højlund, and if you have players like Mason Mount, who yes is injury prone, but if you have Bruno Fernandes, you gotta create more. But once again, youthful players like Garnacho and Kobe Mainoo really showed up for this team. But that wasn't enough as United kept sliding and sliding and sliding down the table, finding themselves in 8th by the end of the season. But they did have one saving grace this season, the FA Cup, where United had been making a great run at it. defeating Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool in Klopp's last ever FA Cup game in a 4-3 overtime classic, one of the best games of that season. And then a game against Coventry, which, I hate to say it, but was that one of the most humiliating wins ever? Manchester United were up 3-0 against a team from the Championship at Wembley and still managed to blow a lead, having to barely beat them on penalties. And heading into a final against the juggernaut that is Manchester City, they were massive underdogs, and then they shocked the world, winning the FA Cup at Wembley against their arch rivals 2-1, thanks to Garnacho and Kobe Mainoo, the highlight of Erik Ten Hag's tenure at Manchester United. And that FA Cup win had just barely saved him his job, because now Manchester United also had new owners. And these new owners looked at the club and assessed it, brought in many good board members to make up the new backroom staff. However, they looked at a glaring issue with Erik Ten Hag and didn't know what to do with him. The media at this point had just been thinking Erik Ten Hag needs to go, but the FA Cup bought him some time. And even when Ineos was looking to try to get rid of him before the FA Cup final, the names that were mentioned were Southgate and Graham Potter, which, oh, good lord. Those are not the guys you want rebuilding Manchester United. And it really gave him some credence for him to stay for at least another season. Now, many Manchester United fans were split on this decision. Erik Ten Hag stayed, but this is also the guy responsible for their worst ever Premier League finish. So many people didn't know what to think of it entering the new season. Entering this season, it seemed like the tide had finally turned for the way Manchester United was ran as a club, as they had a quick, efficient, and much cheaper summer than usual, but with very smart signings. Signing the likes of Mazraoui, Matthias de Ligt, two former Ajax players coming in from Bayern Munich, Joshua Zirkzee, one of the more informed strikers from last season from Bologna, bringing in Lenny Yoro, a top centre-back prospect who rejected Real Madrid to go to Manchester United, and also bringing in Manuel Ugarte, who could provide much-needed cover for Casemiro, as Casemiro's legs are almost gone at this point. But as these players have integrated themselves into the team little by little, Erik Ten Hag is off to another, trademark slow start at Manchester United, going 2 for 2 in his first 4 games in the Premier League. The most embarrassing of which was a 3-0 loss to Liverpool, who also have a new manager in Arne Slot, but they just got slapped around at Old Trafford against their biggest rivals. Many Manchester United fans are once again asking the question, does Ten Hag stay or does Ten Hag go? And if I'm Manchester United, this is what I would do. This season is the ultimatum for Ten Hag. He either shows that this season brings in much needed improvement, and if there's not much needed improvement, then he leaves. It is important to know that sacking him now would be a stupid decision, because that would just mean more instability. Sure, maybe you could give it to Ruud van Nistelrooy for the rest of the season, but that's not what a stable club would do. The reason why this would also be the ultimatum season for Erik Ten Hag is because he hasn't taken Manchester United to the elite level of like a Manchester City, Liverpool, Arsenal. He hasn't shown any progress towards that. Yes, he's brought home trophies, but he's also spent almost £500 million bringing in his style of play, and his style of play is non-existent. And many Ten Hag defenders go out and say, well, it took Mikel Arteta many seasons to make Arsenal relevant. Yes, that's true, but Arteta always had a system to rely on. You could see season by season how everything was improving. And this season, a culmination of 2 years of hard work, I just don't see that with Ten Hag. So with all those resources given to him and not much improvement, this is the season where if he doesn't make it, and he's definitely gone by June, unless there's huge improvement. If Ten Hag does leave, who do you bring in? Do you call in Tuchel? Do you call in Zidane? But let's be real, Zidane's waiting for that France job. My eye would be on someone like Xavi, because Xavi has proven he works well with young players. He won a league title for a Barcelona that's been in decline for many years and did it against the dominant Real Madrid side that we're seeing in Spain at the moment, which is quite an achievement. Even for a Real Madrid fan, I gotta say, the way they did it was pretty convincing. So bringing in a manager like that, maybe at the end of the season, if things don't go well with Ten Hag, is the move for Manchester United. But again, only time will tell if Ten Hag truly is the answer.
We thank you. You are the best supporters in the world.